For 3 years, he never touched her, not with his hands, not with his heart. She was the perfect wife in the perfect house, married to a man who saw her as a contract, not a companion. But the day she stopped waiting was the day he finally looked up and saw the woman he was about to lose. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The wedding had been dazzling. Not the kind where 2 hearts beat as one, but the kind that graced magazine covers. Flawless, curated, luxurious. Catherine stepped out of the limousine, her designer heels clicking against the marbled steps of the Smith estate. She was stunning, an ethereal kind of beauty with quiet eyes that spoke volumes, and a mouth that rarely opened unless she had something thoughtful to say. The media called her the Jewel of the East after the merger announcement. She wore the title like a threadbare coat, presentable but too heavy for her frame. Alexander Smith, on the other hand, had worn his tuxedo like armor. He hadn't touched her waist as they posed for photos. His vows were memorized, emotionless. Catherine had hoped for at least a flicker in his eyes when they were declared husband and wife. But he didn't even look at her. He looked at the camera. Always the camera. Their wedding night was spent in different bedrooms. She waited in her room until midnight, brushed her hair out of habit, applied a soft rose perfume to her wrists, and sat by the window until the moon crossed the sky. He never came. 3 weeks into the marriage, she asked him gently over breakfast, "Would you like to go to the lake house this weekend?" Alexander didn't even glance up from his tablet. "I've got meetings. You can go if you want." That was their first real conversation. 3 sentences long. By month 2, she realized they lived like diplomatic strangers. Polite nods, occasional dinners attended out of formality, staff carrying messages between them. The estate was massive, but it might as well have been a mausoleum. She tried. God, she tried. Catherine would walk into his home office just to bring tea. Some days he didn't acknowledge her presence. Other days he'd give her a mechanical thanks without looking up. She spent her evenings painting in a converted sunroom filled with light but void of warmth. Her canvas was often covered with shades of gray and blue, colors she used to hate. She wore her silk nightgowns, hoping he'd come knocking. Not because she needed him to want her physically, but because she wanted proof she wasn't invisible. She got nothing. They attended galas and business events side by side, the perfect pair. He held her waist in front of cameras, but let go as soon as the flashes stopped. Reporters gushed over how graceful and elegant she was, how lucky Alexander must be. Only Catherine knew luck had nothing to do with it. She was a pawn, a part of the deal, a strategic acquisition. At night, she would write letters she never sent. Folded pages tucked into her nightstand, pages filled with words like, "Do you even see me? Why did you marry me if you don't even want to know me? I'm suffocating inside this silence." But he didn't ask questions, so she stopped trying to answer them. Her maid, Evelyn, often asked if she was okay. Catherine smiled like she was trained to. One winter evening, she stood by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket, holding a cup of chamomile tea. Alexander walked in, dressed sharply, smelling like leather and cold air. She turned to look at him, hopeful. "I'll be in Zurich next week," he said. She nodded. That was all. As he walked away, she whispered under her breath, "I miss you," though he had never really arrived. That night, Catherine stood in front of the mirror, pulled the pins from her hair, and whispered to her reflection, "This isn't what I dreamed of." She wasn't naive. She knew it wasn't love at first sight, but she had hoped for effort, for humanity, for warmth. Instead, she'd married a wall wearing a 3-piece suit. 3 years, and she still didn't know what her husband looked like when he slept. But the saddest part? He didn't know what she looked like when she cried. The mornings in the Smith estate began with silence. No birdsong made it through the insulated windows. No clatter of dishes or morning banter drifted from the kitchen. Just the hum of the central heating system and the distant ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway. Catherine woke before the staff each day, not because she had anything pressing to do, but because sleep had become more exhausting than being awake. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the silk rug, her hands resting in her lap as though waiting for a cue she never received. Her bed, massive and ornate, had never been shared. Even on their wedding night, Alexander had left after the last guest departed. She had watched him from the window as he climbed into the back seat of a black car and disappeared into the dark, without a word. 3 years had passed. Still, not a single night had he spent in her room. Catherine opened the curtains slowly. Rain tapped against the glass, soft and rhythmic, more comforting than any words her husband had offered. Below, the estate gardens stretched wide, perfectly manicured, untouched by human emotion. Just design. Just function. She wrapped herself in a thick cardigan, tied her hair into a low knot, and padded barefoot into the hallway. The house always felt like it was holding its breath. Tall, cold walls. Portraits of dead relatives. Furniture worth more than some houses. It was all beautiful in a way that felt sterile. Lifeless. Like a museum no one visited anymore. The staff greeted her politely. "Good morning, Mrs. Smith." She smiled back, the corners of her mouth lifting just enough to be convincing. "Morning, Leo. Any plans for the rain?" "No, ma'am. Just indoor maintenance today." They always addressed her with respect. Always Mrs. Smith. Never Catherine. As if the title might hold her together when everything else threatened to fall apart. She walked to the east wing, the part of the house Alexander rarely entered. It was hers. The sunroom with the arched windows. The conservatory she'd filled with plants. The studio where she painted landscapes she'd never visited. Today, she walked straight to the grand piano. She hadn't played in months. She lifted the lid and ran her fingers over the keys like greeting an old friend. Her touch was gentle, unsure. She played a few notes from memory, Debussy, soft and melancholic. The sound filled the room like breath, and for a moment Catherine felt seen. Not by anyone else, but by herself. Then she heard the echo. Not of music. Of silence. The kind that follows you even when you leave the room. The kind that lives in your chest. She stopped playing. Later, she found herself in Alexander's wing, wandering. She didn't know what she was looking for. His office door was slightly ajar. Inside, he sat behind his dark oak desk, speaking into a headset. His posture was perfect. His tone clipped, controlled. "No, we're not negotiating. Tell them the offer stands as is." She didn't knock. She never did anymore. She just watched. There was something about the way he looked at his phone more than he ever looked at her. How his fingers danced over contracts but never touched her skin. She stepped back before he noticed her, returning to the corridor like a thief. A thief in her own marriage. She walked aimlessly for another hour, through room after room of curated emptiness, each one colder than the last. Not in temperature, but in spirit. She entered a guest bedroom and stood still in the center. The room looked just like hers. Same linens. Same antique mirror. Same lifeless perfection. It was then she whispered aloud, not to anyone in particular. "I could disappear and no one would notice." Dinner that evening was served at 7 sharp. The table, which seated 20, held only 2 plates. Alexander sat across from her, scrolling through his phone as he chewed. Not rudely, but not attentively either. She picked at her food. The chef had prepared pan-seared sea bass, her favorite. No one asked what Alexander liked. No one ever knew. After 10 minutes of silence, she looked up. "Do you ever think about how quiet this house is?" she asked softly. He looked up, confused by the question, as if the silence had never occurred to him. "I like quiet," he said. She nodded. Of course he did. "But do you ever feel alone in it?" He looked at her for the first time in weeks. Really looked. Then, after a beat, he said simply, "No." That was the moment she stopped hoping he'd understand. She excused herself before dessert, leaving her untouched plate and her heart in the same place, abandoned. In her bedroom, she pulled a thick notebook from beneath the bed. Her journal. She opened to a blank page and wrote, "The worst loneliness isn't when no one is around. It's when the person you sleep under the same roof with doesn't see you at all. He doesn't hate me. I'm just not real to him. If I screamed in this house, the walls would be the only ones to answer. She closed the book, placed it gently back under the bed, and turned off the lights. Outside, the rain fell harder. Inside, the silence screamed. It was a Wednesday when Catherine made the decision. Not that anything happened. Nothing ever did. And that was the problem. She sat in the sunroom that morning, the sky outside an indifferent gray, the rain reduced to a mist that clung to the windows like breath against glass. Her tea had long gone cold. She hadn't touched the canvas in front of her in over an hour. Her hand still held the brush, but the paint had dried on its bristles. It was their 3rd anniversary. There was no card, no breakfast tray, no call, no small gesture. Just silence. And this time she didn't cry. She didn't wait. She didn't ache. She went still. Still, the way a storm does before it breaks. Catherine took her time dressing that evening. Not out of vanity, but clarity. She wore a soft cream blouse tucked into tailored black trousers. No makeup. No jewelry. Her hair was pulled back in a simple knot. She didn't need glamour tonight. She needed gravity. She walked down the long corridor toward Alexander's study. The heels of her shoes clicked sharply against the marble floor, louder than usual. Deliberate. She didn't pause when she reached the door. She pushed it open without knocking. Alexander sat behind his desk, reading a report, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. The faint smell of bourbon lingered in the room, mixing with the musk of aged leather and polished wood. He looked up, surprised. Not alarmed. Just surprised, like someone noticing a painting had moved an inch to the left. Catherine. He said her name like a question. She hadn't heard it from him in weeks. She stepped inside, closed the door behind her, and leaned back against it. Her arms remained at her sides. He sat straighter. Is something wrong? She stared at him. Really looked. His sharp jaw, the tiredness around his eyes, the perfect control in his posture. How had she once thought he looked like safety? Now he just looked like stone. I need to talk to you, she said. He gestured toward the chair in front of him. Of course. Sit. No, her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I'll stand. He raised an eyebrow. All right. There was a beat of silence. Then another. Catherine exhaled slowly and began, her voice steady, clear like a blade. I've been your wife for 3 years, Alexander. And for 3 years, I've lived beside you like a shadow, present but never seen. I've tried to be patient. I've tried to be kind. I've tried to understand whatever this arrangement is supposed to be. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel the weight of your absence. His jaw tightened. He opened his mouth, but she raised her hand, stopping him. Don't speak. Not yet. You've had 3 years to speak, and you haven't. Alexander's mouth closed. He folded his arms across his chest, listening. His face unreadable. She stepped forward, her voice growing firmer with every word. You married me for a contract. I knew that, but I didn't come into this house as a prop. I came with hope. I gave this marriage a chance. I gave you chances to see me, to speak to me, to touch me, to love me. But you didn't. You wouldn't. And I am done. There it was. A flicker. His expression cracked for half a second, and Catherine saw it. A brief confusion, maybe even a hint of fear. He didn't interrupt. She stepped closer to his desk, but didn't sit. I'm giving you 30 days. 1 month. Either you decide what you want from this marriage, or I walk away from it. No threats. No drama. Just the truth. Alexander stared at her, unmoving. She held his gaze and added, with finality, I want a husband, not a business partner. I want someone who sees me. And if that's not you, I will no longer pretend to be your wife. Silence stretched across the room like a held breath. Then finally he spoke. Catherine, you knew. No, she cut in, her tone suddenly sharp. Don't tell me what I knew. I knew what I hoped for. And I've swallowed that hope every day for 3 years while you acted like I was just furniture. Her hands were trembling, but she kept them clenched at her sides. Her breath caught for a second, almost broke, but she forced it back down. 30 days, Alexander. You don't owe me love, but you owe me clarity, and I will no longer accept less than that." He looked at her, and for once there was no smugness. No calm. Just quiet shock. She turned and walked toward the door. Before she opened it, she paused, her back still to him. "It's our anniversary today. Not that you remembered." Then she left the room. And for the first time since she had stepped into the Smith estate, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel invisible. She felt real. That night, Alexander sat alone in his office. The lights were dim, the room filled with the low hum of the rain returning outside. He poured a glass of bourbon but didn't drink it. He stared at the door she had walked through. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had spoken to him like that. And even more terrifying, he realized he didn't want her to leave. Not because it would look bad. Not because of the merger. Not because of the press. But because the silence, her silence, had always been tolerable. It was her voice that shook him. The estate didn't change overnight. The staff still lit the fireplaces at dusk. The chandeliers still glowed like quiet stars in the ceilings. Meals were still served precisely at their times, elegant and unnecessary as always. But Catherine changed. And with her, something else shifted, subtle at first, then undeniable. She was there, yes, but not there. Not in the way Alexander had grown used to. Not in the way her presence filled the space without noise. She stopped trying. No more soft greetings in the morning. No more warm tea quietly left on the corner of his desk. No more gentle tapping on his study door, asking if he'd eaten. No more waiting up for him when he worked late, eyes soft with worry. She stopped sitting across from him at dinner. Stopped painting in the sunroom when he walked past. Stopped wearing perfume. She didn't move out. Not physically, but she withdrew so completely, so cleanly, that it left a chill in the air Alexander couldn't place at first. The first time he really noticed was a few days after her ultimatum. He sat at the long dining table alone. A full place setting sat across from him, untouched. He glanced up once, expecting her to enter. She didn't. He waited 15 minutes longer than he normally would. Checked his phone. Ate in silence. He told himself he didn't care. And yet, when he got up from the table, he caught himself looking toward the hallway. Nothing. No rustle of her skirt, no soft click of her heels on the marble. He went to bed unsettled and didn't understand why. By the end of the first week, the unease had grown teeth. In the mornings, he passed her in the corridor. She didn't look down, didn't avoid him. But she didn't stop to speak either. Just a nod. A glance. Polite. Detached. Her eyes didn't plead anymore. And that's what gnawed at him. It was easier when she had wanted something from him, his time, his touch, his warmth. He could deny it, dismiss it, bury it beneath business meetings and stock reports. But now there was nothing to push away. Because she'd already gone. And the space she left behind in his life was loud. He began noticing things he had never paid attention to. Her laughter gone. She used to laugh sometimes in the garden with Evelyn, the housekeeper. A soft, melodic sound. He hadn't realized how often he'd heard it until he couldn't anymore. The studio light, always on late into the evening, was now dark. The sunroom door remained closed. He hadn't seen her touch a brush in days. She stopped leaving books around the house, the ones she used to annotate in the margins with neat, looping handwriting. She used to leave them open on the chaise lounge, as if inviting someone to ask what she was reading. Now the shelves were perfectly aligned. Silent. He walked through the East Wing one night. Not to find her, he told himself. Just passing through. He entered the sunroom. Her sketchbook was on the table, half open. He picked it up and stopped breathing. It was a sketch of a woman, Catherine, clearly, standing in the middle of a grand, empty hallway. Her face was expressionless, and her body was wrapped in vines. Around her were mirrors, each reflecting a slightly different version of her. One sad, one angry, one blank. He turned the page. Another drawing. A man standing across the room, faceless, hands in his pockets. Watching her. Not reaching. He felt a slow dread crawl up his spine. She had been telling him, quietly, constantly, and he had never listened. That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. He stood at the window of his bedroom, looking out into the gardens. Moonlight silvered the hedges and kissed the tops of the fountains. It was beautiful. Sterile. Much like the life he had built. He thought of her voice in his office, firm and unwavering. "I want someone who sees me." He hadn't. Not really. Catherine had always been there. Gentle, steady, loyal. But he had filed her away in the same part of his mind where he placed contracts and commitments. Something guaranteed. Permanent. Taken for granted. But now her absence was a haunting thing. Not loud. Not angry. Just final. He tried to work the next day. Tried to read the quarterly reports, review merger terms, skim through legal updates. But his mind wandered. He opened his drawer where a small silver box sat, a wedding gift he'd never given her. A vintage key pendant on a chain, antique, delicate. He didn't know why he had kept it. Maybe because some part of him had always known. She was the only door he had never opened. Days passed. She didn't mention the deadline again. Didn't remind him of the 30 days. That would have meant she still expected something from him. She had said everything she needed to say. Now it was his turn. And that terrified him. Because for the first time in his carefully curated life, he had no idea what to say. The day started like all the others. A clear sky. Breakfast set at 8. The scent of polished wood and citrus oils lingering in the air. Alexander sat at the head of the long mahogany table, suited, composed, reading the day's financial news on his tablet. The screens glowed cold blue against his sharp features. The staff moved around him like ghosts, efficient and quiet. But Catherine did not appear. Not even a shadow of her skirt in the hallway. He didn't ask where she was. He couldn't bring himself to give Evelyn the permission to see what he couldn't admit. He missed her. Instead, he sipped his black coffee and read the same paragraph 4 times. That afternoon, he found himself wandering. Not walking, wandering. As if something inside him moved before he did. He took a different hallway, past the music room where she once played Debussy on rainy mornings. The lid of the grand piano was closed now. The keys untouched. He paused by the sunroom. The door was ajar. Inside, Catherine sat by the open window. Her face was turned toward the light. A soft breeze lifted a few strands of hair from her cheek. Her hands were folded in her lap. Not drawing. Not painting. Just being. He didn't realize he had stopped moving. She looked so still. Not in the way people rest, in the way people leave. He knocked gently on the frame. She turned her head. Met his eyes. There was no hostility. No surprise. Just silence. "I didn't want to interrupt," he said. "You're not," she replied. Her voice was calm, unreadable. He stepped into the room, not fully sure why. There was something desperate in the way his eyes scanned the space, looking for signs of the woman he never took the time to know. He spotted her sketchbook, closed this time. A single paintbrush rested across the top. Dry. Neglected. He nodded toward it. "You haven't painted." She looked down. "No." "Why not?" Catherine paused. "Because I stopped needing to make beauty out of pain." The words struck something in his chest he didn't know was there. He sat across from her, on the low velvet settee. For the first time, there was no desk, no hallway between them. Just space. Breathable. Bare. She didn't offer him anything. But she didn't leave either. "I saw the drawings," he said. "I know. They were," he trailed off, looking for a safe word. None came. Honest. She turned her face back toward the window. "I spent a long time trying to communicate without confronting you. I used to think if I just loved you quietly, you'd hear it. Eventually." He swallowed. "I didn't." "No," she said simply. "You didn't want to." That stung more than he expected. He studied her profile, the way her eyelashes shadowed her cheeks. The calm on her face was not peace. It was resignation. And that scared him. "I didn't know how," he said suddenly. Catherine looked at him then. Didn't know how to what? He hesitated. Then truth, raw and fragile. How to let someone in. She didn't flinch. She just listened. He went on, voice low, like he was afraid the truth would collapse if spoken too loudly. Growing up, I was taught control, containment. Love wasn't part of the equation. It was always performance, efficiency, strength. Vulnerability wasn't safe. He looked down at his hands. Then you came. Quiet, kind, open, and I didn't know what to do with any of it. I kept waiting for it to become leverage, or manipulation, or weakness. He lifted his eyes to hers. But it never did. Catherine's expression shifted, just slightly. A soft crack in the mask. I wanted to love you, she whispered. Even when you gave me nothing back. His voice broke. I know. Silence settled between them again. But it was different now. Not empty. Heavy. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I don't want you to leave. I know that too, she said. But do you want me to stay? Or do you just not want to lose? That question made him flinch. She stood slowly. You don't have to answer that. Not yet. But you're running out of time. She walked past him, her perfume soft, familiar. He didn't turn to watch her leave. But when the door clicked shut behind her, he exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. That night, Alexander stood alone in the library, surrounded by books he'd never read. He reached for one at random, and a slip of paper fell out. It was from Catherine's journal. Forgotten. Or left. In her handwriting, slanted and lovely, it read, He doesn't hate me. That would require feeling. He just doesn't know how to hold something that won't break him. He closed the book, heart pounding. And for the first time in his adult life, he felt the beginnings of fear. Not of failure, but of losing something real. Something he never deserved. Something he might, finally, be willing to fight for. The mornings didn't change all at once. The air in the Smith estate was still too still, the quiet still too practiced. But something in it had shifted, ever so slightly, like the faint creak of a long-sealed window cracking open. It wasn't loud enough to notice if you weren't listening. But Catherine noticed. She woke one morning to find a note tucked beneath her teacup. No flowers. No dramatic gestures. Just a note. Written in Alexander's clean, restrained handwriting. Would you join me for breakfast this morning? It was simple, but it was the first time he'd ever asked. She stared at the card for a long time. Then she turned the teacup slightly, as if aligning it with the edge of the saucer could help her align the chaos in her chest. She went. He was already seated, dressed in slate gray and navy. Crisp. Composed. But when she entered the dining room, he stood. Not out of formality. Out of instinct. Catherine noticed. She nodded. Good morning. He pulled out her chair. She sat carefully watching him. The meal was quiet, as usual, but the silence was less suffocating now. Not absence, not avoidance. Just space. Breathing room. Halfway through breakfast, he spoke. I didn't forget our anniversary. Catherine blinked, unsure how to respond. I told myself it wasn't important, he said. That it was just a date. But I remembered. She said nothing, only met his eyes. Waiting. I bought something for you, he added, reaching into his pocket. He placed a small silver box on the table and slid it toward her. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside lay a delicate, antique key pendant on a fine gold chain. Vintage. Intricate. I bought it the day we got married, he said. I kept meaning to give it to you. I just never did. Her fingers touched the pendant lightly. What is it for? She asked softly. He looked at her, and for the first time, there was vulnerability in his voice. I think it was supposed to be symbolic. A key to the house. The future. Something. But I think maybe it was always meant to be yours. Because you're the only one who ever made this place feel like a home. Catherine looked down. It wasn't a promise. But it was something. That week, he began showing up in places he'd always avoided. The sunroom. The garden. Even the studio. He didn't say much, didn't interrupt. He simply existed there, quietly, curiously, with the same awkward energy of a man stepping into foreign soil and hoping not to offend it. One afternoon, she caught him standing in front of one of her unfinished canvases. He turned when he heard her. You haven't painted, he said. No. He studied the blank space. "You're brilliant," he said, not looking at her. Catherine crossed her arms. "You've never said that before." He nodded once. "I never said a lot of things I should have." She didn't answer. But she didn't leave the room either. He started learning things about her. Not from staff, not from records, but from her directly. He asked questions. "What's your favorite piece of music? Why that author? What made you choose that shade of blue in your painting?" He listened, really listened, as if her answers were not just information but small doors into the world he'd never tried to enter before. And sometimes she answered. Slowly, cautiously, like a traveler testing the ice before stepping forward. But she saw the cracks forming in his armor. The way he'd pause outside her door as if waiting to be invited in. The way he'd linger in the kitchen just long enough to notice her preferences. Jasmine tea, almond butter, no sugar in her coffee. The way he stopped reaching for his phone at dinner. One night, she caught him in the library, not working, but reading a novel. One she had once left on his desk years ago. "You're reading that?" she asked, startled. He looked up, the corner of his mouth twitching. "You underlined most of it." She stared. "I thought maybe if I read it," he said, "I'd understand how you think." She didn't know what to say. So she said nothing. But something shifted in her eyes. One evening, in early autumn, they found themselves walking in the garden after dinner. It wasn't planned. He had asked, "Would you like to walk with me?" And she had paused, heart-weary, then nodded. The air was crisp. Leaves crunched underfoot. The scent of lavender and pine filled the space between them. He kept his hands in his coat pockets. She walked slowly, as if trying not to jolt the fragile truce between them. They stopped by the small pond, where the reflection of the estate shimmered across the water's surface. "I don't know if I'll ever be what you needed," he said suddenly. She turned to him. "But I want to try. And not because you gave me 30 days. Not because I'm afraid of losing you. But because I see you now. And I don't want to look away again." She looked at him for a long time. Then, quietly, "You don't need to be perfect. Just honest." "I'm trying," he said. Catherine nodded once. "Then keep trying." She turned to walk back. A few steps later, she paused. Looked over her shoulder. "You coming?" He smiled. And followed. That night, he stood outside her bedroom door. He didn't knock. He didn't enter. He just stood there, as if waiting for the moment to be right. Inside, Catherine sat on her bed, the pendant still resting in its box on her nightstand. She didn't put it on yet. Not tonight. But she hadn't hidden it away either. And that was enough. For now. It was the 30th day. The sky was overcast, a dull pewter ceiling stretching over the Smith estate. The wind carried the scent of wood smoke and rain-soaked stone. Autumn had deepened its hold, and the trees in the garden had surrendered most of their leaves, carpeting the ground in rust and gold. Catherine sat on the edge of her bed, fully dressed, her coat draped across her lap, her divorce papers sealed in a crisp white folder beside her. No tears. No hesitation. Just a slow, quiet certainty. She had given him time. She had given herself time, too. Time to see if anything would change. If his words would take root. If his presence would evolve from performance to participation. And over the past month, she had watched, measured, weighed. She had seen the effort. But she wasn't here for crumbs. Not anymore. So she stood, lifted the folder, and walked toward the door. She passed the silver box on her vanity, the one with the key-shaped pendant inside, and paused. Her fingers grazed the edge. She left it. Some things had to be given back, not taken. The courthouse sat on the edge of the city, quiet and sterile like all courthouses. The receptionist at the front desk gave her a polite smile as she approached. "Filing today?" the woman asked. Catherine nodded. "Yes." She opened the folder. Slid the documents forward. Then, the doors behind her opened. Catherine didn't need to turn around. She knew. Alexander walked in slowly, no entourage, no staff, no lawyer in tow. Just him, in a dark coat and quiet desperation. She didn't speak. Neither did he, not at first. He walked up beside her, his breath visible in the cold air. "I wasn't sure if you'd come," he said. I wasn't sure you'd stop me, she replied. He looked at the papers. Neatly signed. Final. I read every word, she added, answering the question behind his silence. Even the ones I never thought I'd have to. Alexander turned to her. And then he knelt. In the middle of the sterile courthouse lobby, without witnesses, without fanfare. Just a man in a suit on his knees, finally stripped of pride. I don't want to save this marriage because it's convenient. Or for appearances. Or because I'm scared to lose you, he said, voice steady, eyes locked on hers. I want to save it because I love you. Catherine blinked. The room stilled. He went on, quieter now. I don't know when it started. Maybe it was always there, buried under fear and ego. But it's real. I love you. I wake up and think of you. I go to sleep hoping you'll still be there the next day. And I want to learn what love means from you. He stood but didn't reach for her. Didn't touch her hand. He just looked at her. You don't owe me forgiveness. But I want to earn your future. Catherine's heart was pounding. Not because of the words, but because they didn't feel like lines. Not rehearsed. Not begged. Just true. And for the first time since the day they said I do, Catherine saw his face, unmasked, exposed, unguarded. He had finally arrived. She looked down at the papers. The pen beside them. Then up at him. I didn't come here hoping you'd stop me, she said. A pause. But I hoped if you did, it would be for the right reason. He nodded once. Silent. Still waiting. She lifted the papers. And slowly, without flourish, she tore them in half. Then again. Then again. The sound was soft. Final. She dropped the pieces into the nearby bin, turned back to him, and whispered, Don't make me regret this. He exhaled like he'd been holding the breath for years. I won't. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. Not as a symbol. Not as forgiveness. But as permission. To begin. The night air was still when they returned from the courthouse. Neither spoke during the drive back. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was full. Like a long exhale after years of holding breath. The mansion looked different to both of them when they walked in. The same walls, the same chandeliers, but the space felt smaller now, closer. As if the house itself had been waiting for this moment to breathe again. Clara paused in the foyer. She turned to look at him. Alexander stood a few steps behind her, hands in his pockets, his eyes soft but unreadable. Would you like some tea? She asked. He smiled faintly. Only if you'll share it with me. She nodded, disappearing into the kitchen. When she returned, 2 cups steamed between her hands. They sat together by the fire, the glow wrapping them in warmth. The silence was no longer avoidance, it was ease. He watched her. The flickering light painted gold across her skin. Her eyes were calmer now, but there was still a question there, a carefulness born from years of distance. Clara, he said quietly. She looked up. I don't deserve you, he whispered. She set her cup down. Deserve has nothing to do with love, Alexander. He moved closer. I was so afraid that if I touched you, you'd see what I really was inside. Empty. Unworthy. Cold. Her voice softened. Then touch me now, and let's find out who you really are. He hesitated, then reached for her hand. This time, his touch wasn't hesitant or distant. It was reverent. His fingers traced the curve of her wrist, the inside of her palm, the place where a pulse whispered beneath her skin. She didn't pull away. He leaned in slowly, as if asking for permission with every breath. When his lips brushed hers, it wasn't hunger, it was apology. Years of it. She trembled, not from fear, but from release. The kiss deepened, patient, searching. It wasn't the passion of strangers or the urgency of lust. It was something else entirely, the quiet breaking of walls, the rediscovery of something that had been buried under years of silence. He pulled back just enough to look at her. Are you sure? Her answer came without hesitation. I've waited 3 years for my husband to come home. He lifted her into his arms, the firelight flickering across the room as they ascended the staircase together. In the bedroom, their bedroom, for the first time, the world fell away. He traced the lines of her face as though memorizing them, whispering things he'd never dared say. How she haunted his thoughts, how her absence had undone him, how her strength had taught him to feel again. Every movement between them that night was slow, deliberate, full of meaning. There was no distance left to close, no pride left to protect. When he finally entered her, it wasn't possession, it was surrender. Her name left his lips like prayer. Afterward, they lay in the stillness, the firelight dancing against the walls. His hand rested over her heart, hers on his cheek. For the first time since they'd said "I do," there was no silence between them. Only breath, only warmth, only love.
Thank you so much for listening to this story at Folklore Chronicles-k stories. And please, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, kindly click on the subscribe button, turn on the notification so when I post more stories like this, you'll be the first to get them. And if you're a returning subscriber, thank you so much. I sincerely appreciate your support and I do not take it for granted at all. Until I see you in my next video. Bye.